All right, so far you've watched the introductory video for our Cemba Reappraising the Team session, our new improved virtual version of this. And in that video, I gave some background about why we come together in January of the first year to spend about a half a day to work on just reappraising the team. And the core messages in the introduction are that we can always be better. There's an opportunity for learning and improvement no matter what our performance has been. And we also know that teams tend to settle into habits and repeat their behaviors unless there's some kind of intervention that occurs. And finally, finding a good sort of temporal crossing point is important, and the end of the first semester and beginning of the second semester brings new coursework, new tasks, new projects that will challenge the team in ways that are different from what happened in the first semester, and provide a nice moment for some reflection and improvement. And I shared there my own research would suggest that finding those kinds of points of time between major phases of work are really ripe places for learning and improvement in a team. So in this lesson, I'm going to introduce what we mean by reappraising the core team. And we'll see in a minute that that has two pieces. It has an individual piece and it has a group piece. And I'll explain the basis and the rationale for those pieces. So first of all, I'll slide myself over there. Does feedback help? Well, that's a really valid question. And as we learn in the organizational behavior class, performance reviews are tricky business. They sometimes can actually have negative outcomes depending upon how they are conducted and when they are conducted. So it's both the content and the timing that matters. And there is some meta-analytical evidence for teams to look at whether or not feedback helps. And this research looks just like the other research on performance reviews in that it can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing depending upon a number of things that we want to pay attention to. So as we're thinking about this reappraisal process in this team, and I would also say for any of your teams, it's important to think about these elements. Where it directs your attention in the goal hierarchy. If the feedback, gets just purely about individuals and only individuals' goals and outcomes, the performance review in terms of improving the team is unlikely to be as positive as it could be, let's just say, and it could potentially be negative. So we need to think about both of those. It also needs to find a way to get at people's motivation. And you know a great deal more now after the organizational behavior class about motivation and trying to understand, what's going on with people's sense of purpose and meaning. Is the team providing that? Are the team projects providing that? What about the sense of mastery? Are people feeling like they have the capability to improve their performance and the team's performance? And then also just trying to understand, again, get back to the idea of needs and people's interests, right? So negotiating and thinking about what are people really hoping to get out of the team and out of the program. And that could be diverse, right? And I think that's one of the challenges to continue going through. And we talked about that back in August, that if it's not out in the open, you'll still feel it, and you'll feel that people aren't behaving in the ways that are consistent with maybe what they're saying their goals and purposes are. So here's another time to try to access some of that honesty. But what I hope is you've established some trust. If you feel like there's been a disruption of trust, then it's going to be important to go back and find some opportunity to rebuild and reestablish trust in the team. And then ultimately, does it actually generate process learning, right? So you can think about knowledge of results. So what grades did you get on your projects? But was there process feedback? Did you actually look at how you conducted those projects? Have you analyzed that a little bit? And if people simply look at the outcomes and talk about the performance outcomes as part of this review process, the opportunity for improvement is lower, and the feedback intervention isn't as likely to be successful. So what we know is there are at least three different categories of feedback we can be looking at: the team, the individual, or both the individual and team. And we have some research to help us understand that this is actually going to be most effective to produce a positive outcome of performance review. So what I just shared with you was meta-analytical results, right? So pretty good evidence that we need to be concerned with individual motivation, team and individual goals, and process review, not just outcome review. So that's step one to think about. The next piece of evidence I'm going to share with you about the best way to think about reappraising your team comes from a relatively recent quasi-experimental study that my friend Kristen Biffar conducted. And this also is a pretty high level of evidence because it's at least quasi-experimental, where there's different treatment conditions assigned. And in this case, what they did is across different cohorts of an MBA program, they looked at different kinds of reappraisal and feedback interventions in different program years, and they could then look with some validity at what the variation was across the interventions. And what they found is just consistent with what we know, is that unassisted teams, meaning left to your own devices, people don't correct for coordination losses. So if there were problems going on, teams just kind of keep living with it and keep moving forward. So unassisted is just nothing, no interventions. And they were only able to really improve their performance when there was an integrated peer appraisal and a rediscussion of the group goals. So let me just show a little bit about that result in a statistical table. So basically what this is looking at is basically the scores on the average group projects across different groups. So we had a control group, right? So that's a important piece of experimental design where no intervention was done, and those teams on average had grades on their team projects in the upper 80s. Possibly a B+ range, maybe skirting around an A- range. And then they had two different guided conditions, right, where teams were assigned one of two different approaches to reappraising the team. There was intervention where they just gave peer feedback. So all they did was do 360 feedback, which you've done already online in a quantitative version and gotten that, but we'll talk about the additional peer feedback we're going to do as part of this reappraisal. Or they looked at their charter. So there was a team. So it was either or. So they either were assigned this an individual sort of 360 round robin peer feedback, or they were just looking at their charter. So this would be kind of basically like saying, meet sometime this week or this month and look at your charter and update it and discuss your goals. And what we found was just having the teams be told to revisit their charter really didn't change anything. There was no difference statistically between that and nothing. And what we found was if there was individual peer feedback, that was a little bit better, improved performance a little bit better than simply doing nothing. But this is the most important and telling piece here, is they found that if we did both peer feedback and a charter and team level reappraisal, performance was the highest out of all these groups into the clear A realm. So individual feedback and no intervention did nothing, right? They didn't do that, and they found that nobody ever automatically reflected on their team charters if they did that. So the end of the story here for us is that the research shows us that the most effective team reappraisal process combines peer feedback plus a reappraisal of the team and revisiting the charter. So those two things together are the magic ticket, and what we're going to be doing as part of this reappraisal process here at the beginning of semester 2. So what are these tools for reappraisal? We're going to be doing two different types of reappraisal. And what I would recommend is that you just schedule these for different days. You certainly could do it all in one day, but you're going to need to set aside at least 2 hours probably to do this, maybe a little more depending upon the level of challenges you were facing in the first semester. So there are going to be two things, right? Built on this research study, we're going to have individual feedback, and this is going to be kind of a combination of what I call an appreciate and even better activity. I take those words from Kevin. I think that's a really nice way to think about how do we think about positive reinforcing feedback and critical feedback. So we're going to have you talk to each other about both those things. I appreciate, which is your kind of reinforcement feedback, and what would I like to see different coming from you this semester, which is more of that critical feedback. And then a team level assessment, which is the team reflexivity. And the outcome of this is that you're going to turn in an updated charter by the end of January. So now let's look at each of these pieces independently. So step one of this reappraisal process is going to be the individual feedback or peer feedback intervention. And this intervention is what I had you complete those forms in positive and critical feedback. So there were 2 files, and each of you created positive feedback for every single other team member, and each of you created critical feedback for every single other team member. And what we did then is we took those pieces of feedback and we put all of those for you into an envelope. So you'll have, if you have 4 other team members, you'll have 4 sheets in there of positive or reinforcing feedback. And then you'll have another envelope with the same number of constructive critical feedback, okay? And what you're going to be doing in this intervention, and I would have guided you to do this in the session on Saturday, is you'll be going to breakout, and every single one of you will have 2 envelopes. You'll have the envelope with the positive feedback and the envelope with the critical feedback. And what you need to be doing is taking time one at a time. So what you'll start with is you'll say, all right, I volunteer. I'm going to say it's me and my team. I'm going to volunteer to go first. And what you're going to do first is you're going to, before you even open this envelope, you're going to talk to your team and say, well, here's what I think I'm going to hear. So it's really kind of an important part of this process for you to think a little bit ahead of, what do you think your strengths are and what your strengths have been in the team? And what do you think your weaknesses are and where maybe you have fallen short to deliver the way you'd like to the team? So if it's my turn first, I'm going to take my envelope and I'm going to say, okay, I have my envelopes in my hands, and I'm going to say, all right, I think what I'm going to hear is on the positive. I think I'm going to hear that I have high energy. Okay, so I think I got interrupted there. So let's come back to this. So as I mentioned, when you'll get from Tiffany, just make sure you stop and pick up from her. In your team, every one of you will have 2 envelopes. And those envelopes, one will be for positive feedback, one will be for critical feedback, constructive critical feedback. And so you'll end up with an envelope, 2 envelopes. And so Tiffany's got these envelopes for your team. And the intervention will be step 1, as I mentioned. You're going to first go to the breakout room, your whole team, take your envelopes, decide who's going first, what the order is going to be. And, this can be a little bit anxiety provoking, both for yourself and for others, because, it's never super fun to think about getting critical feedback from others. And if there have been, some challenges and you're feeling a little bit like the relationships are a little strained in the team, this could be even a little bit more challenging. But what I can tell you is that in the past, this has been a really great opportunity to try to air some of that. And, everybody who's ever commented afterwards said they felt like this was a positive experience that helped them and their team move forward. Okay, so what we need to do then when you get to breakout is somebody needs to volunteer to go first. And so when it's your turn, and I'll say I went first. Before you look at your feedback, start by saying, what do you think is going to happen here? And I think I've already repeated myself a little bit. Sorry about that. But basically, for positive feedback, I think I'm going to hear that I bring a lot of energy to the team. I am positive. I give a lot of positive reinforcement. I'm the one kind of helping people feel strong and able to persevere when things are getting difficult. Okay, that's kind of what I think I might hear for positive feedback. So then open up the positive feedback and say, okay, so the first piece, and what I'm going to do is read this out loud. You are always showing up and you always have a smile on your face, and that makes us feel good. Okay, thank you. All right. Then we're going to look at the next piece from another team member. I like how you give us encouragement and help when some of us are feeling challenged by individual work. That helps the team be a place that we can come and feel supported through the difficult, stressful processes of this program. Okay, all right. So it sounds like I have a pretty solid view of what I bring to the positive. But then after I'm done with that, the third step is that you talk a little bit with the team, and people can elaborate a little bit, and they can, if there's some disconnect where what I perceived and anticipated in step one was a little bit different than what I heard, the team can act and tell you a little bit more about interpreting what they meant. And again, we're trying to preserve some anonymity. We don't want to hide behind this. So, one of the things is everybody needs to kind of hear what other people are thinking and reinforce, just so it doesn't end up being, okay, the only person who helps interpret in number 3 is the person who wrote that particular feedback. No, it should be a question of, do others feel that way? Because maybe if others don't feel that way, then there's a conversation to be had about why the perspectives are not equal or even across the team. Okay, so once we're done with that, then you're going to move to the critical constructive feedback. And I like to think about this as like, what could you do this even better? That's kind of Kevin's approach to this. So, let's say and assume positive, everybody's trying to do what they can do, but there's things that you can improve and be even better at. So now I'm going to sit and I'm going to repeat these steps and say, what do I anticipate is going to happen? What do I think I'm going to hear with this critical feedback? And part of this is just that self-reflection to improve your process of understanding how you're being seen by others and how you're showing up. So I think I'm going to hear that people are frustrated with how last minute my work is and how late in the process they hear from me with my components of the projects. I also think that people might comment on how I try to reschedule meetings too often. Okay, so now I anticipated, I'm going to open up my critical feedback and read these and say, you have created some challenges for our team because you don't get your work done when we agreed to have it done. Working with you could be even better if you could adhere to the deadlines we set as a team. Okay, yeah, so that's consistent with what I thought. Working with you could be even better if you weren't so negative in your comments in the team meetings. Okay, that one, I guess I don't see myself as negative. Can we talk about what I'm doing that makes it seem like I'm negative? Okay, so this is exactly how it could go, and the group could talk through that and maybe give a little bit of more context and when those things occurred, right? So thinking about the elements of good feedback, try to think about specific behaviors to talk through specific situations where that challenge showed up. So what we want to do when we're done with this whole process, when everybody's had this chance to go through, and maybe it even is best to think about trying to jot some notes down at the end of each person's turn. The main deliverable here is that the team needs to create a group plan. This is an important thing here, group plan to help improve individual performance. So what we're not saying is, this is not a process saying you fix yourself, you better change these things or else, right? No, it's how can we as a team create some structures and create some processes that help you overcome these challenges, right? So if I got that feedback that my work products were coming in too late and that people were frustrated with me missing deadlines, the goal of this isn't just to tell the person to fix themselves. The goal is to say, what could we do differently about our team? Should we adjust our meeting schedule? Should we meet earlier in the week? Or should we meet one extra time before a big project is due? If that will, prompt you to get your work done. I remember from August that you were that kind of reverse hockey stick. And I know you said it's hard for you to get a pulse if you don't have a deadline. So maybe we need to, put something in place in terms of our pacing of our meetings and when we're going over products so that the deadline actually occurs earlier. So this is what we're talking about the team's responsibility to help support the individual. Yes, of course, the individual needs to agree to try to make changes to help improve their participation and performance in the team. But this should also be, how do we think about setting making the conditions right for the person to bring their best self to the team. That is what we're trying to achieve as an outcome of this first part of the intervention, which is the individual peer feedback component. So my suggestion is that you maybe think about doing this reflexivity, this team reappraisal in 2 sessions. Again, it's up to you. If you feel like you want to go through this whole entire individual process and then continue on with the team process, that's great. We would have done it that way on Saturday. But one other way to do this is set aside, approximately an hour to do the individual feedback. I think you realistically need at least 10 minutes per person. Some teams take longer, and so maybe having a little flexibility on when you need to conclude your meeting would be good so that you can get through everybody, give everyone enough time, and work through this process of developing a plan about how to support individual performance. So when that's done, then you'll move on to the team part of this. And so the team part could be, again, following this in the same meeting, or you might want to schedule another meeting later in the day, the next day, within the week, to go over the team part of this. So the end goal here is a new charter by January 31st. So you've got to kind of move on this in the next few days to get it done, so you may want to try to do it once or in 2 parts. But let's move on now to what that second part's going to look like. So when we look at the idea of team reflexivity, reflexivity is involving several pieces, which first involves looking at team performance. So reflecting and thinking back on what were those outcomes of our performance. And that can be both the task objectives, the projects, the grades, and the team performance as how we work together. Which objectives were or were not met. So what did you say back in August that mattered the most to your team? And of those, what worked and what didn't work? Spending some time to talk about those strategies and processes. How did you meet? Did the meeting schedule work for you? Did the project planning and project leadership approach that you implemented work? What things did you like? What would you rather have change or go away? And then spend some time talking about how performance can be improved going forward. Here too, we have good research that shows that reflexivity, and this is meta-analytic results, is that when teams do this, they're better at shared mental models, so a common understanding of what each other knows, what each other cares about, and how to work together. Improved collaboration, just a general sense that we interact better, we apply our expertise and hear and listen to each other, and we have a greater sense that the outcomes of our performance are strong and reflect the capabilities present in our team. People have better decisions as a result, and relative to baseline, teams that engage in reflexivity, they increase their productivity by 1.16, almost 1.2 standard deviations above the average performance. So again, strong evidence that this is an important thing to be doing. I think it's a valuable thing to think about doing in the semester after each project, but I think realistically we know sometimes the schedule demands of life, work, and Cemba have prevented that, but that's why we're again here doing this in January, so that at least there's this kind of nice pause point for some reflection and maybe redirection if necessary to even make the experience in the team and the performance of the team even better. So the team part of the exercise is the team reflexivity exercise, and this part is sort of separate from that individual part. And what you'll be doing here is spending some time individually rating your own kind of reflective sense of how the team worked. So there's a couple parts of this. First, there's this Cemba first year experience file. And this will be posted on Canvas. I would have handed this out, but it consists of a series of questions, and it says you're supposed to circle the issues that you think were going on in your group and X out the ones you think were not a problem. And so here's one on here: overly dominant team members. So if you felt like, yeah, there was that, Mary was kind of pushing all the time and I felt like trying to drive the team in her direction all the time, I'm going to circle that, right? Varying rates and degrees of participation. No, even despite that, people showed up and people did their part, X, okay? So you're going to download this or just do it online, whatever you want to do if you want to do it electronically. But every one of you needs to fill this out before you meet and have this part of the team reappraisal process happening. And then the other thing that you need to do is download or take a look at online your team charter and look at what you think your charter did or didn't do to set up to prevent some of the problems you've been experiencing and to continue to support the things that you think are going well. So process for this is, first, you're going to individually fill out this form, think it through. Second, you're going to individually look at your team charter and write some notes, both combining this and the team charter, about some areas that you think you should change and revise in that team charter, okay? What you're going to do is identify 3 strengths of the team, 3 weaknesses of the team, and then create this revised contract. This is for your use. I don't have to see this. We need the revised contract turned in to Tiffany on the 31st of January. So again, signed by all team members, turned into her, whether that's electronic or hard copy, just do that. So as a final comment here, this is essentially an after action review, is also what reflexivity is. And as part of this process, once you've done the team reflexivity exercise, by completing the form, looking at your charter, thinking about the strengths and weaknesses, discuss the strengths and weaknesses. This is where you're going to meet as a team. Again, spending, I think at least an hour to discuss what you each have felt were the strengths and weaknesses of how the team worked, and looking at the charter and then looking through that to say what really was useful in that charter, what was sort of extraneous, and in hindsight, we didn't need to get that much detail in there. What did you think you didn't talk about in the charter? And revise your charter. And again, then the final product here from this will be an updated team charter due to Tiffany by January 31st. So in summary, your reappraisal will be 2 parts. The first is the individual peer feedback intervention, which you need to schedule, get the envelopes, and sit down and go through that process as I described it on the slides. Allow at least an hour and make sure that you talk through and come up with plans for how the team is going to support people to be even better this semester. The second part is to complete the team assessment form, review your charter, identify at least 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of the team, and then conduct that after action review and update your team charter. Sign the new charter and turn it in to Tiffany by January 31st. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions about the processes that I described in these 2 videos, please send me an email and I will attempt to clarify anything that I can help you do. Again, I encourage you to get moving on this, conduct this week if possible, or into next week at the latest, and complete this by the end of the month.